Car interiors. Awkward, dark, cavernous spaces filled with a myriad of materials and awkward shapes. It is fair to say then that they're quite difficult to light. Well, in this video I'm going to give you some useful and practical tips on how to light them better. What is going on, guys? Shooting Dave here, so good to see your faces. Welcome back to the channel. Now, if you're new here and you don't know what I'm about, well, I'm a photographer from London that now lives here in Los Angeles, and I make photo and video editing tutorials. So, if that sounds like something of interest to you guys, then please do consider subscribing. Yes, today we're looking at Automotive's most overlooked feature, the interior. Now, why is it overlooked? Well, maybe it's perhaps that it doesn't perform particularly well on Instagram, and maybe that's enough to put you off shooting them. Or maybe it is because you have an awkward expanse with a bunch of different materials illuminated by tiny windows, and you really do need perfect conditions in order to nail an exposure in one shot. So this pushes people into using multiple exposures, and you have to know a thing or two about lighting. I light plenty of interiors using CGI in my day job, and I'm happy to report that most of the lighting practices do actually translate to photography. Now, to qualify that statement, here are some examples. Okay, so let's go over some problems you might have with lighting. Now, first of all, your light is small, the sun is massive, and that still has a difficult time at lighting the entire interior. So the first thing we need to tackle is how to make that light source bigger. In order to do that, we're going to use two very basic tools. The first is a long exposure, and the second one is movement. Essentially, you're going to have your camera fixed on a tripod, and you're going to use a long exposure whilst you move through that image with your light. Movement and long exposure combined will make that light source appear much bigger. When I am photographing an interior, I like to photograph from either the passenger or the driver's door, and basically looking across the cabin so you see all the seats and all the dash and the steering wheel. Now, pro tip here, make sure that all the interior lights, that's the little dome lights above you in the car, are switched off, as we don't want any of that spill ruining your masterpiece. Now, to make my light appear bigger, basically I stand behind the camera and start walking down the passenger side of the car, around the front, and down the driver's side of the car, or vice versa depending on which side I am shooting. And as I walk around the front of the car, I'm pointing my light source at the seats, and as I walk down the side of the car, I'm pointing my light source at the dash. Now, the exposure time can be anything that you want. For me, personally, I found that 10 seconds works best for me. And what I like to do is do this over and over until I've got exactly the amount of light I want over the dash and the seats. And what you're looking for here is something where it's nice and even, there's no hot spots. So carry on doing this until you get that perfect exposure. Now, this exposure typically serves as my base exposure. It's what I build up the image from. So basically I layer all the other exposures on top of this. So what you want to do is, once you've got an exposure that you're happy with, is really have a look at it and see what you think is missing. Now, in my experience, it's normally the door cards. So I go about lighting those next. Now, a little tip on how to light these. Basically, you want to wind down the windows, and what you want to do as well is turn down that intensity of your light and quickly just move it in and out of the car. Now, you want to do this quickly so you don't overexpose the door cards. By now, you've pretty much covered the entire interior. You've got the dash and the seats nicely lit. You've just exposed for the doors as well. But there are a few little elements that can be clearer. Now, it might be my client speaking through me on this one, but I like to make sure any badging or branding is taken care of and we have nice, clean reflections on that. Obvious areas are things like steering wheels. Now, typically my clients like the steering wheel badging and branding to be nice and clean with no distracting elements inside of them. So in order to do this, what you can do is basically turn your intensity of that light all the way down and then just wave it inside the car to get some nice reflections. You might have to play around with the angle of attack a little bit, but you should be able to get a nice clean reflection on any branding on the steering wheel. And well, it can also light up any buttons that are on the steering wheel as well. Other areas might be the dash. You might be pretty satisfied that you've lit the entire interior, but pay close attention to your dash and center console area. These can often be a little bit dark. Now, in order to light these, basically just go to the rear of the car and start from either the driver or passenger side. Start a bit wider than the car and basically walk from one side to the other, pointing your light from the rear of the car towards the dash. And then this should push a little bit of extra light onto your dash. If you're struggling here, just turn up the intensity or walk a little slower just so you can get some more light on that dash. Now there really are two things left to do, and that is expose for the background so you've got something to see through the windows, and capture the dials. I won't go into how to capture the background because basically there's no light painting involved, well, unless you really want to. All you need to do is expose the background so there's something to be seen through the windows. Now, to capture the dials, what you want to do is turn the car on into accessory mode without starting the car. And basically this will light up all the dials, gauges and lights that there will be inside the interior. And this just adds so much more depth and excitement to the image. Oh, and if the car has ambient lighting like this Mercedes does, then it's also a good opportunity to capture that as well, as that really does make the image pop. Not to mention filling in all the dark areas. Okay, let's go over how we put these together. Okay, inside of Photoshop, this is the base exposure. Essentially, it's just exposing for the background, so there's detail and information through the windows. Nothing more going on there. Now let's bring in our first light painted layer. This is the first image that we spoke about, where I walk from behind the camera, around the front of the car, and then down the side of it. And so it's basically illuminating all of this through here. And it did a pretty good job, so this is why you want to pay attention to doing that. There is a camera raw filter on here, so we can have a little look at what was taking place, and basically I just dropped down the exposure as I felt it was a little bit too hot, and there was no other adjustments made to it whatsoever. Then there's little curves on there to darken down this distracting area here, because when you're shooting close to door jambs, it's often quite ugly. So yeah, I just basically put little curves on there with a mask and then darkened it down. So taking down the shadows, midtones, and then dropping the highlights, and it's masked onto just there. And this layer, by the way, is set to lighten over the base exposure. All of these, in fact, will be set to lighten unless I tell you otherwise. Next one was the steering wheel. As I mentioned, we got these badges on here that I wanted to take care of. So if we come in nice and close, turn this one on, you can see we've got the steering wheel. This one has a mask on it as well, so just roughly painted around where the steering wheel is. Obviously, if you look at it, far too bright, so I've put a curves adjustment on top of it, basically just knocking down the exposure just by making it look more contrasty, and I feel like that fit quite nicely. There's a little bit of light that I wanted to put on the dash, so this is another exposure that I used from like this kind of technique down here when I was walking around the side of the car, and that's just coming through across the top of the dash, and nothing really going on too clever there. Then a little bit of a curves adjustment above all of this, and this is dropping it down. Now I have a sneaking suspicion that I put this curves adjustment in at a later stage because we've got all the illuminations to go on top. There's also a mask on this group, so that takes care of the car, and you can see there's a mask in there because if we turn that mask off and come in close, you can see that the AMG logo is being lit up on the screen, and I didn't want that because I knew that I was going to be doing an illumination pass. So if we reactivate that mask, come over here, this is the illumination pass, and you can see how much life it just injects all this energy into the car and makes it look that much better. I really like how this looks, and to be honest, I felt like it could be a little bit brighter, so I've actually got a brighter exposure on here, and I basically just flooded the footwells with it. So if we look, it's set to screen, and this one here is only just masking down here and on the passenger side as well. So if we turn this on and off, it's basically just filling in the footwells, really helping selling that like sense of luxury that this Mercedes AMG GT43 has. And so this is why like things like ambient lighting really do add that level of excitement. If a car doesn't have it, then capturing like all the dials light up, you might have to turn the headlights on when you do that, but it'll just make it look a little bit more interesting rather than just lighting up plastics and leather and a bit of metal. So yeah, lighting passes are pretty good, and definitely recommend using those. And well, that is all that I did inside of Photoshop. I did take it back into Lightroom just to give it a little bit of a color grade, and well, this is the final result. And that is all from me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any comments or questions, let me know down below. If you haven't already, please do subscribe and follow me on Instagram. I've been at Shooting Dave, and as always, guys, I'll see you in the next one. See ya. Oh, nearly fell. Well, we got there in the end.